All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about workshops, how to run them at your convention. And we're really going to dive in and get a really deep look into the nuts and bolts of how that can work for your show. I am joined by some of my favorite people that I have had the pleasure of running workshops alongside, who also have a lot of experience in this topic. So I am pleased to have them with me. Let's go clockwise to me, and I'm going to make all of you introduce yourselves
I think you're
and
in trouble
tell
because we're
me.
all in a different order.
I know. Well, so I'm just going to call you all out. So, so tell me who you are, and talk a little bit about your. Are you a workshop host? Are you a showrunner? I want to know all about your background with this topic. So we're going to start with Tiffany of Pros and Cons Cosplay.
Hello, everyone. I am Tiffany from Pros and Cons Cosplay, she, they pronouns. Yes, I've been cosplaying for like 20 years, probably more than that at this point. I don't like to count. But on top of that, right, we do workshop instruction. We've also helped sort of manage like on-site workshop management for some conventions. And then new this year, we'll be bringing our own into one of our shows to start some workshop instruction. So we're really excited. I guess I've worn many hats in the workshop arena. So super excited to have this conversation with this awesome group of people. We've worked with them, in the past, and I'm just very aware of like some of the great things they do in the workshop community. And I'm super, super excited about this conversation. I think it's important to happen, considering that workshops are becoming more popular. So a group of people to get together on this topic.
Awesome. So glad to so glad to have you here. Okay, next, according to me, is Regan of Cowboy Crunchies.
All right. Hey guys, I'm Regan, she, her pronouns. I have also been cosplaying for simply too long. Um, uh, Scone and I, our big focus, aside from just creative cosplay, mixed media, all that good stuff, is a lot of our content is actually very much educational focused. And so a couple years ago, it really made a lot of sense to bleed that into this kind of world of hands-on workshops, being able to teach small size classrooms, and give people very nuanced one-on-one instruction. And so when it comes to teaching online at cons, workshops, we kind of love to do it all. And I am super grateful that so many cons have been very open to this concept.
Yeah, welcome. Next, we have Pro of Pros and Cons Cosplay.
Hi everyone, I'm Pro of Pros and Cons Cosplay, or Tamara is fine. She, her pronouns. I have a very similar background in cosplay that Tiffany does, given our sibling relationship and the fact that we started our group together. But yes, a lot of work in operations side of cosplay events and convention running. So that's been a really fun ride, in addition to being a cosplayer myself and also hosting a couple of workshops. So it's given a nice sort of 360 view of a lot of the things that go into workshop operations, but also running them as an instructor. And so, again, just echoing what others have said, super excited to be here with this group and talk about this awesome kind of budding topic that I think lots of folks are getting into.
Great. Glad you're here. And then next, we have Scone from Cowboy Crunchies.
Yeah, Regan kind of gave the overview. But I'm Scone, also been cosplaying super. I don't want to count. I actually have a degree in education, so I try to bring that to the workshops that we run. Try to structure them in a way that makes good pedagogy, which has been, I think, super helpful for making them successful and being able to kind of break down like what we would want to do for workshops and what makes sense. But also that's just a super fun thing to do and a super cool way to be passionate about crafting. So yeah, also excited to be here copying everybody else.
It's okay, you're unique, always. Next, we have Casey from Casey Renee Cosplay.
So I'm Casey. I have been cosplaying for a while as well, and I love education. I That's just kind of where I found that I get the most joy. I've done a lot of things in the cosplay space, like commission work, guesting and stuff, but I've found that what brings me the most joy is education. And I work really hard to find the best way to teach things for people. And so, yeah, I am all on board with the hands-on education. I also like my dream and goal in life is to just teach sewing. So like that kind of is where I'm at with my life. And that's why I'm here, is because I like to teach.
Sweet. Well, I'm glad that we all have the same kind of foundation of we really like doing this. So it's really cool that we're all here. Oh, and about me, sorry, I'm Beverly. I'm also known as Down in Creative Studios. And I have been cosplaying for, well, I started cosplaying in 2006, 15, 14, something like that. But I found that I really like showing people how I do things. And from the very, very first tutorial that I ever wrote, which was just like a picture with steps on it, I found that I really find a lot of joy from showing people how to take the things that I know and apply them to something that they want to do and watch them kind of grow as creators and artists. And that has since translated into a book. I wrote a book about making with EVA foam, as have a lot of other folks here have also written books and a lot of tutorials online. But one of the things that I also really love doing is hands-on in-person instruction. I found that I love connecting with makers of all skill levels, specifically new folks, to show them how to do things. And one of the things that I wanted to do with this discussion was to extend that arm of the education to teach people about workshops in general. So there's an element of workshops that is sort of a mystery. How do you go about adding it to your show if you're interested in folding this kind of programming into your event? There are a lot of moving parts. Sometimes it's hard to get. You can see the thing that you want to have, but how do you make that happen? Who are the people that you need to have involved with that? What might it look like? What are all of the elements that can come together to make that a success? So that's what we're going to do today, is just kind of pick things apart. And I'm going to be asking a bunch of questions to these super overqualified people about how to run a workshop program at a show. I already kind of talked about why we're having this discussion, but I also want to mention that workshops, we're talking about cosplay specific crafting workshops, and they are becoming more and more prevalent at conventions. Whereas I think, well, it's just a few years ago, we didn't really see these as often at conventions, but now we're seeing them more and more and more. And it's not just one or two workshops, it's like entire workshop tracks. So we're definitely seeing an uptick in that trend. So it's a good time to start talking about this and to lay down a healthy relationship or healthy foundation to establish good relationships between the events and the instructors, to kind of manage expectations and to set everyone up for success. So yeah, this talk is for convention runners. If you are running a convention and you're thinking about starting a workshop track or improving the one that you already have, this is for you. Also, workshop track organizers. If you have ever run a workshop track, I'm hoping that you'll learn some things from this. And this is also of interest to anyone who has or is interested in instructing workshops. Although we're going to be focusing more on the nuts and bolts of how to run the show, not necessarily how to run a workshop. Topics that we're going to cover include the benefits and considerations of adding a workshop event to your programming. The first steps, like where do you start? The people involved, the key roles for organizing and running a successful workshop event. The financials, which is the cost of running a workshop. Ticketing, scheduling, the workshop room, like what you actually need to have in order to host a workshop. We're going to talk a little bit about marketing and selling tickets, which you need to have butts and seats. So we're going to talk about that. And then we will talk about the workshops themselves and how to craft workshops that will fit your event and your audience. And then if we have time and we're all up for it, want to just really quickly run through a typical day of experience just to kind of round it out with that. Let's get started with talking about the benefits of adding workshop programming to your convention. So as conventions continue to grow, workshops have emerged as a key component of event programming. And then in the next few minutes, we're going to explore why workshops are more than just a passing trend. They are a valuable asset to your event. So we're also going to talk about how they remain relevant and enhance overall attendee experience. So that's with either drawing in new audiences or inspiring returning guests. So my first question, how do workshops keep conventions relevant and aligned with industry trends?
Well, I think first of all, especially now, where people are looking for where they're going to spend their money and the number of conventions that exist, alone in the United States, let alone the world, there's tens of thousands of conventions out there. Having workshops and unique programming makes your convention and your event stand out. It makes it a place where people want to gather and then throw their dollars at it, right? Because if your show is one weekend and another show is another weekend, you have to really make the case for why somebody will want to come to your event. And having workshops, that's becoming an emerging trend across across a lot of different conventions, kind of keeps you in the conversation, keeps you in the talk, makes you look modernized, makes you look like you're involved in the community, keeps you relevant and current. So I think having workshops and unique programming like that helps conventions stand apart in an increasing number of conventions that we see. It keeps you from sort of drowning out in all the convention noise, having good programming that folks will want to come to.
I also think that right now is kind of an interesting time because workshops are becoming more prevalent, but they are by no means at most cons right now. I think it's actually there's a handful of cons I can think of who do run workshops with great success, but to most of them, it's kind of a new concept. And like you said, there's so many cons out there. And when an attendee thinks about, well, why do I want to go to this convention? Why should I continue going to this one if it's just the same programming year after year, the same sort of panels year after year, and things can kind of fall into like a stagnation sometimes. I do think having something like a hands-on experience or a VIP experience or a special experience with a guest, that's the kind of stuff that appeals to a lot of attendees. Maybe it's not for everyone, but you definitely have a group of people who they're going to these cons for these very special personalized experiences. And like signings with celebrities and such, a small hands-on workshop where you get to take something home and make it, even if you're not actually a big time cosplayer or super into crafting, that's really appealing. And it's something special that people will want to do. And they'll think, wow, I'm going to go to this con on this day because this is the kind of cool programming I can expect. And it's something unique.
Do you think that workshops are attracting new attendees, or are they giving regular attendees something new to look forward to, or both?
I think both. I also, what I've experienced in my workshops is you have a lot of people coming either because their friend is coming or they're coming with a spouse. They're not like costuming people, and they're maybe not even con people. They're just sort of signing up because they're like, that seemed cool. And they're having a really good experience. And it's sort of like introducing the idea of pursuing more activities in this like nerd space, in this crafting space. I've got a number of those people that I'm like, why are you here? And then at the end, they're just like, I had a great time.
Yeah.
I'm coming back. And they're not like people that I would have pegged as coming to cosplay workshops, but
I agree. I think it's quite a mix. Like I've had some people tell me that like when they've missed signups for workshops, they would have said, oh, I would have come if I'd known about this kind of thing. So that does happen occasionally. But yeah, I do really think it's a mix because you have some people, some cosplay oriented people who this is their jam. They've signed up for all of our workshops. I see them in every single one. But then you've got the people like Scone mentioned who they're not necessarily cosplay crafting folks, but they're here for the really cool experience. I do think the new people that it's attracting, maybe not so much people always coming to the con solely because of the workshop, but I do see a lot of people who normally don't buy experiences now
Hmm.
buying an experience because
Hmm.
this is more appealing to them than something like an autograph.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say something similar
Yeah.
is I'm noticing a lot of the people coming to my workshops are people who have attended the con for probably a decade, and they're like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, this is a new thing that I get to try. Like I've been attending this for so long and now I get to try something new. So I think that that's also like where the benefit is, or where like that comes in, is that people that have been attending forever are starting to get bored. And so they're like, wait, there's something new I can try. And so they're all about it.
Yeah. I was going to say something and I forgot. That was such a good answer. Um, Oh, I was going to mention YouTube University. I think that there is, I mean, I hear a lot from the people that come to my workshops that they just can't learn the thing from watching a video as well as they want to. And that having the opportunity to have hands-on things and hands-on instruction to actually get their hands on the materials and the equipment and to sit there and have to focus for an hour or two on whatever it is that you need to learn, that kind of learning experience is very people are ready for it after the pandemic and how we were all learning new skills at our houses, that if they have the opportunity to do it in person, that it's pretty great. I actually signed up for a couple of wig workshops at Dragon Con last year, and I had the best time. And I am one of those people that I just can't, I had a hard time learning the stuff that I wanted to learn on the YouTube channel. So I was able to learn from Regan and Pros and Cons, some wig stuff, which I have used a little bit.
I saw,
But
I
yeah,
saw.
I know. Look at me go. Well, Miss Foam is actually like cutting, although I did cut my finger with the scissors. So, but we won't talk about that. So we've talked about, awesome reasons why you should think about starting to incorporate this other kind of element to your show. But let's also talk about some of the considerations, because there are some things, you're adding more stuff to a show. There's more things to consider. So there's a cost involved, resources, and you also have to consider, is your audience even going to be interested? So we're going to talk about some of those points. The first question I have is, how do you determine if the return on your investment, or the ROI, justifies the cost of adding workshops to an event? And I realize this is a really big question, but I'm hoping I know who I want to answer this. Can you please answer? Yes, you know who you are.
Okay.
Oh, was it me?
Yes.
Yeah. That was you.
My ROI is like at the top of my mind all the time, mainly because I have no, I always cost out my time indefinitely, but my money is very important to me. So, well, right. So when it comes to show running, you're always thinking about the bottom line. And I think that it sounds harsh and cruel, but it is kind of the truth that a show, most often, most conventions are there to make money. A lot of them are for-profit events. They need to bring in the revenue. And so they need to figure out why putting the additional costs towards bringing in instructors, offering workshops, using additional room space. We'll talk about some of the details of what goes into the operational costs of a workshop and how that's going to benefit their event when they could just run things as usual and not have to spend that money. So, and I think if you're a workshop instructor and you're trying to bring workshops to your local show and you're talking to your local showrunners, you have to be able to articulate why bringing workshops will be beneficial to them. And ROI looks different in different aspects. There's money, but there's also people, there's community building, there is expertise, there is prestige that you can offer. So you have to be able to explain to the showrunner how it might not always be dollars, because truth be told, having additional programming doesn't usually bring money in. Having workshops is not going to necessarily sell tickets to the con, especially if it's a big con already. It'll sell tickets to the actual workshop, but it might not be enough. You might not be bringing in enough new people to justify the thousands potentially of dollars you're going to spend on operating a workshop. But you can also argue community impact. If your show has a huge cosplay community, having workshops that cater to cosplayers and crafters, huge, right? That's going to make the cosplayers happy. They're going to bring their friends. They're going to want to come. They're going to talk about how great your show is. If you're trying to build community, creating a space where people can feel welcome and whole and bring their full selves there and like learn and experiment with cool instructors, boom, love that. People love that kind of like happy fun time feeling, right? It's not just having fun time, it is a happy fun time, but I think that these things are just really important to articulate. You have to just be able to say, this is a benefit to you, not just for me as an instructor, but also to your community, to your local convention constituents. And thinking about it like a business, I think will keep people from feeling burnt out and hurt and take things, I guess, personally. And I think that's another conversation too with you get a no. But something to think about when you're trying to operate, events at your local cons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'll add, oh,
Well,
sorry.
yeah. No,
I think
please go ahead.
the other thing I'll add is I think, right, I think sometimes we get these great ideas. We see like, hey, we're so excited as a community, but there has to be this moment of kind of stepping back as a show operator of like, okay, what are the needs of my community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from really knowing your show. And I think a lot of times in any kind of endeavor, when you're trying something new, if you don't know what your show is about, what your community is about, you're not going to hit your ROI because you don't know what your investment actually is because you're not sure where it's going to hit in your community. So I think we'll probably talk about this. I might have jumped ahead, Beverly, but I really think
Uh,
knowing your community, what your people are going to benefit from, what they're going to want to see, how they're going to want to see it is so, so important when thinking about bringing in a workshop. Because the thing that works for Dragon Con isn't going to work for a small library con, isn't going to work for a con in California, isn't going to work for a con in the Midwest. Like there's so many different considerations for your specific operation that I think are really unique and really special. And you as a showrunner really need to know what that is in order to kind of bring in any kind of new programming, especially one that brings in a lot of you know, decorated instructors and having folks spend ticketing money. So just
mhm.
things to think about too.
And along that line, but we will talk about this a little bit more later, is if you are unsure about how you arrive at that decision and what would be good for your community, um, who to reach out to help you with that, which is the instructor. All right, well, so we'll move on to the first steps. So after you've done some research, you decided that you want to do some workshops at your event. How do you start? What's the first? How do you get this thing going off the ground and started? How can my first question is how can partnering with local crafters or experienced workshop hosts help when adding workshops to a convention? Casey, I'm going to call on you.
So having the experience of somebody who's actually taught a class before is like so different from somebody who might have hosted a panel or just maybe taught their friend. You really do have to consider the experience because like education and being able to teach a skill is different than being able to do a skill. So taking the time to really find people who actually can teach, vetting them out, maybe see like, do they have a YouTube channel? Do they write tutorials? Do they have a book? What is their education style like? If you can figure out just from that process how their education style is like, then you'll get an idea if they actually are going to be able to teach. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, like your educators are kind of the face and like the person working alongside with the attendees. Those are the people that get that first hands-on action with the attendees. They're the ones that are going to make the attendees feel like it was worth their money or not. So it really is important to kind of find experienced educators who understand how to teach something, not just how to do something.
Mhm.
And I think it's also valuable if a show is doing workshops for the first time, if they bring in people who have run workshops before, because we're familiar with the things that are going to come up. You know, if you're running the workshops for the first time, you may not be thinking about, oh, what's my no-show policy? But I know what my no-show policy can be. I have 3 of them, and I'm happy to, whatever your convention wants. But or what happens when too many people sign up, or what happens when the convention center staff messed up the order and there's not enough tables. We've run into all of those situations. We're really, really familiar with how our workshops run and are able to, I mean, every single time there's something that comes up, that, we can help anticipate and work around in a way that if the show's new to workshops and the teachers are new to workshops, it has a much higher chance of going off the rails.
Yeah.
So for a show that is kind of just getting started, would you recommend going full-blown workshop program or maybe a little bit smaller?
I would say smaller. I
Yeah,
would say
I
like
would go.
bring in like one or two people who can bring in, do like four, maybe five classes, see how it goes. Because the other thing is, you have to build up the audience. People are not
Mhm.
necessarily going to know what is this. I mean, they may know through social media, but you don't want to go too big.
It's a lot of logistics, and I'm sure we're going to get into it later, but there's different amounts that the con can take on versus what the instructors can take on. And we've taught at some cons like Cosplay America where the con truly takes on almost everything, and the instructors are just kind of there to teach. But if folks are super new to workshops, that may not be the best model for the first year. You may need to rely on instructors um, a bit more than that. And we've also taught workshops where we do literally everything, and the con does absolutely nothing. And Beverly, I'm sure we will get into that a little more later. But that's also it. I think that would be a tall ask to ask someone who's brand new to the workshop scenes to truly take everything on themselves.
Well, and getting back to thinking about how a show can get started. So, what I'm hearing is maybe start small, start with someone who's experienced, who kind of knows and can anticipate issues coming up and can look at your event and work with you to craft something that will not overwhelm anyone, but something that your attendees would also like to have. And I always think that feedback from attendees is good. And I'm personally just so bad at getting feedback from my workshop attendees afterwards. But I'm curious to see if you have gotten feedback and how that has, if that has shaped your workshops for the future, how you do things, or how a show could take that feedback and work with that for another workshop track at another show for the next year.
I've gotten some pretty good feedback. Like, I'll get an email almost every show from somebody saying something like, "Oh, I loved your workshop. I learned this." Like, I had one person like tell me a whole story about how they tried learning tambour embroidery at a different con with a different instructor, and they could not get it. Nobody in the class could get it, but they took my class, and they were surprised how many people understood it by the time they left. And like, I feel like that kind of stuff, like if they personally email me, I'm going to send that to the show. I'm going to forward it to them and
Mhm,
be like, "Hey, I just want you to know that this is the impact right here. These are the moments."
mhm.
Or groups of people will come take some of my classes and then they'll like chat about it online and how much they had fun doing it together. And I feel like those are ways that we can get feedback. I mean, I'm in the same boat as you, Beverly. I keep meaning to make a survey for my students. I'll
Yeah.
do it one day.
I would love a con that if they do nothing else logistically, they figure out a way to collect feedback. That would
Mhm.
be amazing.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the next little section. We're going to talk about the people involved with putting a successful workshop track together. So we have the instructors, we have organizers, which are different from instructors, hopefully, and people who help. So let's talk about instructors. What makes experienced instructors crucial to the success of a workshop event? And how do they elevate the convention's credibility?
I think someone said this before, but I want to
Mhm,
just reiterate because it's such a great point that like it is so important to have someone who knows how to teach. It's such a different skill set than someone who just knows how to do the thing, because knowing how to navigate someone through a mistake or through an error or through a whole crisis as they are trying to learn a sewing machine for the first time is a really, really significant skill set that your average bear isn't just going to know how to do. So I think you have to be
mhm,
really intentional when you're picking out instructors. I think, you need people who are good with people and people who are organized. I think that definitely builds that credibility because nothing's worse than kind of, as an attendee, you're paying a ton of money, you go into the classroom expecting to learn a thing, and then suddenly everything's on fire because the instructor has never done the thing more than once, right? So I think when hiring your instructors, you really need to be intentional about that and who they are and what their credentials are because you're in a very intimate space with folks, right? They're learning to do a thing, and that can be very vulnerable for people. And you don't want to put someone in there who's going to kind of exacerbate that vulnerability or make that person feel worse, or the students. So I think all of you at some point have said this, but I want to hit it home again. It's just so important that knowing how to teach is different than knowing how to do. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, like good instructors are crucial for a good experience, but I have also personally seen that good instructors are actually crucial for selling the tickets in the first place.
Mhm.
It's really interesting how much attendees actually do pay attention to not just what is the topic of the class, although that's obviously a huge part of it, but who is teaching the class. You know,
Mhm.
is it somebody I know, somebody I respect, or are their credentials really interesting? I think because so often there is this paid hurdle involved, people, if they're going to be paying for a hands-on class as opposed to just walking into a free panel, they want to be sure that it's worth their while. And I think
Mhm.
there's more of an attraction if you're learning from someone whose work you respect, or someone who's a professional in the industry, or someone who's got like some experience, so you know that who you're learning from, it's going to be a good experience, rather than someone who, how do I know that they actually know more than me? Am I Ron Swanson in this situation? It's kind of interesting the way sales sometimes go with that. I don't know if you guys have seen that as well.
Yeah, I
I mean,
think, yeah,
go
I think
ahead.
so too. No, no, no.
Oh,
You
I was
can
gonna say,
take this.
I also think, I mean, I keep approaching this from like the perspective of a con's doing this the first year, like the first time that they're doing it workshops. And if it's not a good experience, nobody's going to be interested in coming and possibly wasting another 30, 40, $50 the next year. You know, you may be shooting yourself in the foot in terms of having sort of a long-term programming uh
Yeah,
goal.
it really matters. Yeah, go ahead,
Sorry,
Tiffany.
sorry. Oh, sorry. I'll also say too, like bringing in an instructor that knows what they're doing. Right. They're in a room with students, like Tamara said, with sharp objects in a very vulnerable space. And kind of goes back to the original point of maybe you bring an instructor that maybe costs you a little bit more, right? All instructors kind of set their own costs, and that whole thing we'll talk about later. Maybe you bring in an instructor that costs you a little bit more to make sure that the experience is good for your first couple of years, which means you may offer fewer workshops to help save costs there. Maybe you can't bring in a star-studded roster of instructors the first year because it's going to cost, the assumed value here of what you're bringing in, and that's okay. But maybe start small by bringing in really, really well-rounded experts that can help build the program. And then later on, you can sort of add, and maybe you can also add in locals who might not be experts at teaching, but are on their way or on the rise to learning, maybe like a cohort program or like an education about teach the teacher kind of thing later on. But start out with folks that are solid and spend the money there. If you can have somebody that comes in off the street that they'll run a workshop for you for $20, assume value here. You're going to get a workshop that's run like it was paid for $20 and a handshake. You know what I mean? So I think that's another thing for showrunners in particular to think of. The knee-jerk reaction is to go the cheap route. But when you have people holding sharp objects and hot things and smelly things, it is good to spend the money for the safety and the longevity of the programming.
Let's move on to workshop organizers. So I would love for someone to explain what a workshop organizer is and why they are important. What makes them different from an instructor or an event runner?
I can go. An organizer is your ops team, basically, right? They're the folks who are helping to make the thing happen. They theoretically should not also be the instructor. That would be great because they're going to be running around putting all the things together to make things work. And I do think it has to be someone who is not only familiar with large scale event planning, but also someone who is good at kind of managing multiple things at once, and has an idea of what's expected in cosplay and costuming. That having some of that background is really important because you're going to kind of be able to anticipate needs a little bit differently than perhaps someone who doesn't have that familiarity. But ultimately, that's your operations team because it does really require its own separate operations team that's a little bit different than maybe what you would see, just a general programming person or your general cosplay contest person or your general, I don't know, ticketing person. Someone who's really especially there to help troubleshoot and deal with things boots on the ground.
I think at a very minimum, the organizer, we need, as instructors, we need someone who can speak to the con, the
Mhm,
hotel, ops, that kind of thing. We
mhm,
need someone who is in a position on staff who can be the go-between if there's an emergency, or understand if something goes wrong, or radio for somebody. Even if the decision is that the instructor is going to be taking on a lot of the actual classroom responsibilities, like maybe on the higher end of that scale, like we're bringing in the electrical cords, we're messing with the power, etc. We still might need an organizer who can talk to the power people if something
mhm,
happens.
mhm.
So I do think at a minimum, someone ready to communicate with the other powers that be is what we really need.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. Well, let's move on to the other important folks that are hopefully in the room or just outside the room helping us out are the assistants and the helpers. And that can be a plus one or a workshop helper, which I prefer to have someone who's familiar with me that I know that I can trust to be like, hey, this thing is in my purse. Can you please go get it for me? Or, that pink thing that was I put in that box and I can't describe it very well because I'm in instructor brain world. Those kinds of people that can help troubleshoot problems as they come up on the fly. So if you can't bring somebody with you, are there staff members that the show can hopefully provide or assign, or how does that work? And I guess I'm calling on the showrunner folks in our group here that can help answer that.
Yeah, and I think in an ideal world, that comes from the organizer. They should be developing at least a team and cascading that information down to the various units that are in that organizational structure to be able to assist. So an organizer can't just be one, maybe the overseer, I guess, is like one person, but then that person definitely needs a team of people to help manage things. And that is like your on-site sort of support and your staff. Those are the people that are checking tickets, talking with the instructors and saying, hey, what time do you want me to shut off people coming in if we have some late people coming in, helping to
Mhm.
clean up, helping to organize stuff in the back. And you need to have meetings, regularly scheduled meetings, clear meetings with instruction ahead of time so that way they're prepped and ready to go. But also once you're on site, making FaceTime with the instructors just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because again, to the earlier point about what the instructor's role is to do is to teach. They're there to make the experience of the students worth their time, money, and effort, and just deliver their knowledge. They're not supposed to be having to run around and put out fires. So the organizer really should be spearheading all of the logistics behind the scenes, and that includes training staff to assist the instructors as well. To Beverly's point too, sometimes instructors will bring in like another handler, another helper to help with the instruction, and that person might be a little bit more intimately familiar with the workshop ins and outs. They'll be more familiar with how the thing is coming together or what the specific materials are. Your on-site staff, your convention helpers, the ones that are put on or hired or brought in by the con, might not be material experts, but they should know enough to be able to troubleshoot general like logistic concerns, or at least know who to contact.
I also want to point out that at a bare minimum, for me personally, I feel that the helper that is 100% required, I don't care where they come from, I don't care who they are, is someone to help at the door with load in and checking the tickets.
Yes.
That is truly difficult to do on your own as an instructor. And if you don't have a helper, or if you don't have someone that the con, even just a volunteer that the con has given you, doesn't have to be the organizer if they're busy, but just another person to assist with load in, scanning tickets, manually checking tickets, that is a godsend. That's going to always be my 100% must need helper.
Yeah, yeah, just the con, just have somebody own that room. Absolutely could just be a volunteer as long as we get to talk to them beforehand. Hey, make sure every seat has one of these and one of these, and then please help manage and get people directed to their chairs, and then at the end too, because we want to turn the rooms over, please help me just dump everything back in my bins. Absolutely necessary at the bare minimum. Just handling the traffic.
Thank you for
We've done
bringing that
it.
up because that's such an important thing, but it's so stressful. And when we start with that much stress, we never start on time when we're checking our own people into class. And then there's always the stragglers that come in late, or the ones that come in and they don't realize that it's a ticketed thing, or they have to reserve a seat. So the helpers really do help manage all of that. all that extra stuff. Well, let's move on to a big question. Are workshop instructors also cosplay guests? Because we are technically a guest of the show, but I think that we can all agree that we have very, very, very different roles. And as this the whole workshop thing is becoming more and more prevalent, and shows are kind of figuring out where it fits into their programming. The idea of having a cosplayer come to the show to do a thing, I think is being confused, or it was trying to be combined with cosplay guest. They have very different roles, and I would love to talk about this. Would love to know, what are the key differences between the roles of cosplay guests and workshop instructors at conventions? How do their responsibilities and the expectations of what they provide, how is that different?
So it's interesting. I actually think cosplay guest could technically be anyone who you are billing, anyone that you're announcing on your website, someone that you're putting out there because they're going to be a draw to your con, or they're going to provide incredible programming and you want people to know that. And like, maybe we're getting into the technical jargon here, but I actually think that you can definitely bill your workshop instructors as cosplay guests, cosplay people you're bringing in. Because if you're bringing in these fantastic people, why would you not announce this? Why would you not tell everyone that they're here? So if we're using guest in the loose definition of somebody that is you're advertising to help bring people to your con, I think technically workshop instructors could be guests, but their role is very different from traditional cosplay guests that we've seen up until pretty recently. Might be I think what you're getting at more.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I'm getting at. Same but different.
I feel like this suffers because I think a lot of cons have different definitions of guests to begin with. Hallmat has like 4 different kinds of cosplayers that they bring in under 4 different kinds of guest titles. I've seen cons that say, oh, if it's a cosplay guest, they absolutely must judge. That's what cosplay guest means. I've been to cons where the guest is essentially anybody that they are paying to bring to the con and are billing them, and then what that guest is doing for the con is really individualized. I think the important thing is to understand that if somebody's coming in as a workshop instructor, that is what they're there to do. They're not there to do that and judge and be at your desk. It's having a realistic sense of how much high quality, work you're getting out of somebody.
Yeah, judging a contest is an all-day thing.
Yes.
Running workshops is an all-day thing. We've done both, but that's because we're crazy. I don't think that and there's also 2 of us, and we can split it up. But in terms of the hours of programming that you're asking from your guest, I do think it's great. I love the idea of putting people into the different silos as a cosplay guest, because again, not every cosplayer is a great instructor. Not every cosplayer is a great judge. And that kind of gives you the opportunity to play to people's strengths. Rather than mixing and matching. I do think probably for me, the biggest difference between a cosplay guest who is a workshop instructor and a guest who is your judge or someone at a booth is how are you compensating that guest? Because when you're bringing a judge in, or you're bringing someone to speak to attendees in, they should be compensated for their time in some fashion, be it an appearance fee, guarantee, whatnot. Whereas the workshop instructor, and we'll get to this later, I suspect, part of that revenue that they're bringing in for the con, the workshop instructor is also bringing that in as well for themselves. So I think, to me, that's probably the biggest difference in the contract between these 2 types of cosplay guests, I think.
Casey, what do you think?
I was going to say something similar to what Regan said, is you're bringing them into for different roles. You're basically trying to find out like who's going to fit the best as a judge, who's going to fit the best as the workshop runner, who's going to who fits where. And it opens up actually more opportunity to bring on more guests, because you can have your cosplay guest that is at a booth on Friday and Sunday and judging all day Saturday. You can have your guest that is just doing workshops. I feel like it allows you to have a different variety of guests or like people that you're bringing in. I also again with the revenue share thing, like the way that you're going to be paying or compensating for the time of your instructor versus your judge is going to be different as well. I do think though they should still be treated similar in the sense of like if you're going to be flying them in, fly them all in, hotel, like
Mhm.
those kinds of things should just be standard, whether they're an instructor or a cosplay guest that is going to be judging. Um, just because they're all doing work for you, you know? I also think too that sometimes you can get like somebody that has a huge name in our community might not be good at running workshops. So they're going to fit really good in a space at like a booth where fans can come and talk to them and, you know, get like signatures and that kind of stuff. And so I feel like that is also going to vary the kind of content you offer to your basically attendees.
I also think there's a little bit of a logistical thing too. Like if you have a workshop instructor that is also expected to judge a cosplay contest, they're not going to be able to instruct any workshops on Saturday if that's when your contest is. So that is arguably the most popular day where you can shove the most stuff, or the programming is usually the longest.
Mhm.
And you really do want to have that focus. You want to have that day. You want to take advantage of that day by putting as much into it as you can. So if you don't, then you're going to have to find something to fill in that space if you are offering workshops on a Saturday, which I think would be of interest to any show. So just thinking about uh, that kind of thing as well. There's also, I also wanted to bring up that cosplay guests and cosplay instructors or workshop instructors, they are physically bringing different things to the show. You've got suitcases full of costumes that the cosplay guests will bring that they are expected or asked to wear throughout the show. I personally don't wear costumes when I am teaching because I can't move around like I need to. So I typically don't bring costumes with me to my shows that I'm instructing at, unless I have a day that I'm not instructing and I have space in my suitcase that isn't filled with supplies. So there are different things, different parameters in which we have to think based on what it is you've asked us to do.
The only other thing I'll add is it's kind of a larger conversation, I think, with bringing in cosplay guests of any sort of genre is intentionality, right? And we've said this before, but I think it extends not only to who you're bringing in just as your workshop instructors, but any kind of cosplay guests. Shows have to be better about being intentional about who they're bringing in, why they're bringing them in. I think if you're bringing in someone because they have a big name, what do they have the name for, right? And slotting them into an appropriate avenue is just so important. And I think this is a really great example of why being intentional about who you're inviting and what purpose they serve kind of can make or break the experience for everyone. Because you don't want to miscast someone in a space, and set them and yourself up for failure. So yeah, just intentionality is so important as a showrunner.
That's actually a great segue into the next thing that I want to talk about, which we kind of already talked about a little bit already in what we were just discussing. But best practices for inviting instructors to your show. So how do you find them? How do you treat them? How do you compensate them? I feel like we are already kind of touched on a lot of that, but is there anything else that we wanted to talk about? Like would be a great time to talk about compensation and kind of how, like, what our experiences are. This is kind of a new thing with workshops, but I feel like we collectively have had a lot of experience with this, and we can speak to some of the experiences that we have had that we prefer or not prefer.
Yeah, I'll start. For compensation, something to consider before we start like getting deep into numbers and percentages and stuff is that when you put a ticket price on an event, a good ticket price, you know, 25, 30 plus dollars, the attendee has more incentive to show up than if you make it a free workshop. Anytime anything is free, people think, oh wow, I can sign up for this. And oh, it was just free or it was just $5. So like, I'm not going to show up today. And not only is that person like kind of throwing off the educator to where like we bring the supplies for all the people, but they're also making it unavailable to other people. Maybe somebody else really, really wanted that workshop and you took their spot and now you're not there. So that's something to think about is when you have a price tag on workshops, which they should always have price tags, in my opinion, um, think about the price tag adding value and really being valuable to the attendee so that you can ensure people that are serious about learning are actually showing up, because that's just going to benefit all of us.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like, not to say like, oh, well, you just want to price it high so people feel like there's a feeling in, when it's free, it's just kind of first come, first serve a lot of times. Whereas when people are making the deliberate choice to invest not just their time, but some money into it, then I found and we could have talked about this earlier, but like one of the really cool things about workshops is like people make friends in it. Like it becomes this really neat little like social bubble of all these people who are like, yeah, you'll have some people who are like, I just wanted to try it out, or I'm following my friend, but there's definitely like always like the 4 or 5 people who are like, I signed up for every single one that I could get, and now we're all friends at the end of the weekend.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy that. I like seeing people make friends with each other.
Yeah, I do too.
And the piece I guess I want to talk about with costing is you have your ticket price that's covering everything. Ideally, your ticket price is like your product. So if you are a business person and you're like, all right, I'm selling this product, this has to cover X, Y, and Z. Depending on what kind of model your show is operating under, whether it's a shared cost or you're taking some of the ticket revenue, you take all the ticket revenue, like it kind of depends on how this actually like comes out. But I think when you're building the cost of your workshop, you have to think about your audience. What are they going to pay, right? What people will pay to go to Dragon Con, they will not pay in the Midwest. This is not going to happen. So your $100 workshop will not sell tickets. People will not go. They will look at you like you are crazy. No one has any money down here. Like it's just not. They have other priorities, right? Or the money is going elsewhere. So I think that's one thing. And I also think there's an accessibility piece here too, right? Especially now, people are very conscious about what they're spending money on and really thinking about it. So instead of just having all costed workshops, it might be nice to pair it with a free panel or a free opportunity so you can kind of give a sample of what it is that you offer. And it might entice somebody who might not have the money that year to get that same instruction. I think we're really big on inclusivity and making sure everyone can kind of get the instruction that they need to, but also balancing that with the instructor should be compensated for the skills that they bring in. So I think it is nice if you can offer like, your mid-tier to high-tier workshop cost, but also pair that with a low cost or no cost option to where people can get that little sampling of what workshops mean, because that will help you year over year. Those people that go to the free workshop will maybe be more enticed to buy a ticket to a higher costed workshop. And I do think people kind of get in the minutia, like, should I cost this? Should I make it cost this much? Should I make it this cost this much? All of these things kind of go into that when you're figuring out costing. So, in the price for what one person offers is it going to be the same across the board? So what, Calvet Crunchies might offer for a workshop, I might not offer that same thing if I'm doing a show in the middle of nowhere. Based off of some of those factors. And that's totally okay. It's just something to sort of think about. And you might even change your pricing structure depending on what show you go to. My Dragon Con tickets are going to be a different cost because it's going to cost me more to get out there than it would be to do a local con. And that's okay too. So it's okay to kind of move your prices around based off of your audience, your experience, what it is that you're bringing to the table, and some of those other kind of environmental factors.
Well, we have kind of dived right into financials. So I'm going to back up just a little bit, because I want to make sure that we also talk about the cost of like the room and the power and the AV and the operational costs that the show has to absorb in order to make sure that the workshop has what it needs, which is the instructor, the room, all of the things that I just mentioned. Here's my cat, Chris.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi,
Yes.
Chris. Hello, Chris. Oh, Chris interlude. Um, so yeah, so let's back up. But we are going to be coming back to this to talk a lot more in depth, because this is sort of one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation in the first place, was to sort of demystify all of this and kind of sort it out, and shed a little bit of light on the financials. So let's talk first briefly about the costs involved with a show running a workshop. So that includes instructor compensation, whatever that might look like. We've already kind of talked about it a little bit. We will talk more about that later, but we're going to set that aside for now. We'll talk about compensation models, which we're setting aside just for now, just for a moment. And we're also going to talk about how a show can maybe things to consider when you're negotiating with instructors to make sure that everyone is having a sustainable relationship with a show and the instructor. So things that are operational costs for the event can include the room costs money. Power is very expensive. So if you have workshops that require power, it costs a lot of money to do that. AV costs money, that's audiovisual. The hotels cost money, travel costs money, and the operational costs, which include like covering security, badges. If you are being given a booth on the floor, that goes into the overall cost of having you there, and all the little costs involved with that. There's also someone on their team that is a social media person, and they spend time putting your stuff on social media. All of that stuff it is important to the event runners, and so those are things to just keep in mind if you are a workshop instructor. Those are all things that have to happen in order for your presence to be there at the show. So I wanted to talk about that. Was there anything aside from the things that I was just mentioning? Are there any other points that we want to talk about as far as costs that the organization has to absorb?
Well, so there's, you know, some shows partner up with a sponsor that brings sewing machines.
Yes.
There's a very big difference I found in like, I mean, what classes I can offer when they're like, yeah, we have a room of sewing machines because we're working with Sewing Studio X versus nope, we have a room, bring your stuff. And I haven't been involved in that side of con planning, but I'm assuming that finding a sponsor, working out a deal with them, getting them to bring X amount of sheens, usually they want a table in the dealer's room, like those are all additional costs. Now, granted, it does prevent the con from having to buy 12 sewing machines and then store them all year, but it is another thing to consider when I would assume you're sort of trying this out. Like, are you going to go for broke and have sewing machines or are you not?
I feel like sewing machines is a whole different kind of an animal of workshop because they take up real estate. They have to sit there for the weekend. You need space, you need power. And I'm workshop sewing workshops I know are very, very popular. So I'd love to hear more about what is involved. Like, what do you need to do a sewing workshop if there are machines involved?
Frankly, a sponsor.
Yeah,
I
Simply
know
a
of no
sponsor.
con who
Yeah.
has done this on their own. It is
Yeah.
so much
I-
easier with a
I think
sponsor.
Kazam has their own at this point.
Do they? Gosh,
I thought
Sue,
she had a
Sue's
few.
just killing it.
Maybe I'm wrong.
It's amazing.
Maybe I'm wrong. I thought they had their own at this point.
I
They
think a
might.
sponsor, and specifically a sponsor from that's local, because you're gonna also uplift the sewing economy that way, because you're basically gonna say, hey, like, oh, you like these machines, you like classes, they offer their own set of classes, or you can go play with this
Mhm.
machine again next weekend, or you want to get your machine cleaned, you can get it cleaned there. I feel like it's really important to try to find a local sponsor if possible. There's a few exceptions where like we'll do some shows where the sponsor's from like a different state or something, but they're willing to ship machines or something like that.
Mhm.
But that's typically what needs to happen for sewing workshops is we just need a sponsor, and then the educators, the organizers, and the sponsor need to talk about shared materials and things like that.
Yeah. What is the sponsor going to provide thread?
Thread.
Or
Yeah.
does the teacher need to bring thread? And then we're going to be threading all the machines. Sometimes it's just easier. The sponsor's like, well, there are machines. We're going to just bring the thread. We're going to have them threaded for everybody.
Yes.
There's a lot of sort of nitty gritty logistics with that. I know a lot of the Birdnet has been working to with a lot of cons to
Yeah.
partner up cons with local shops, and they've been really, really supportive of the space. And their machines are really easy for newbies to use, so it's been super great
Yes, it is.
with the babies. But it is one more thing that a con needs to figure out, like who do they reach out to,
Mhm.
or
Good
not.
points. I'll also add that if you have a sewing workshop, the chances of you having any other kinds of workshops are pretty low unless you have a second room for
Yes.
the workshops,
Mhm.
because other workshops are messy. You can't just pack up the sewing machines and shove them to the side. Sponsors don't want you to do that anyway. So just something to keep in mind. And that is where you can talk to an experienced instructor to have them help you out with that. So we're going to move on a little bit to negotiating with your workshop instructors and compensation. Because I think that this is an important conversation to have. We have talked a little bit about it already, but it also has a lot to do. I want to talk a lot about like, what is it that we actually do? Because there's a lot of before, during, and after that happens that is all invisible. And I think it's important to understand what it is that we do to create these workshops so that they can run really well at your show, and so that your attendees don't feel any pains while they're there, and that you don't have to put any fires out at the show, because we have thought of everything already. So we're going to break this down into stages so that we can kind of break down all of the work that's involved. So I was thinking about this in before, during, and after workshops and breaking those things down. So can we talk a little bit about what happens before, when, let's say, pros and cons, I want you to come do some workshops. Do you just show up with your bag full of workshop stuff and then plop it down on the tables and start teaching? Or what is involved with getting that ready?
Setting aside time to cry. No, I'm kidding. I think if you're any kind of like, I do a lot of prep and thinking, and I think all of it, this group is planners, and so it's okay. What kind of show is this at? I have usually 1,000 questions, a list of things I want to know, right? Like, what's the convention about? What are the constituents like? Where's it located? What kinds of things are folks going to want to learn about, and what specifically am I being asked to do? Is that a workshop that I've already prepared and have a sort of lesson plan for already, or do I need to create a new one? And if I have to create a new one, what's that going to look like? So I think there's a lot of consideration that goes into accepting an offer to teach a workshop. It's really knowing kind of what you're getting yourself into, what's going to sell well, what people are going to want to learn. Maybe if you're trying to, tap into a community's interest or teach them a new skill, what are those kinds of things? So, lots of research, I'll say, prior to just saying yes, for sure.
Casey, I know that you spend a lot of time on workshop
Yeah.
development, and you have
Yeah.
kits that you put together.
So my process, I'll typically take about 2 to 3 days developing the workshop, the actual like content of the workshop. What are they doing? What's the order of operations? What's my materials list? I find out, can I get this thing wholesale? Where am I getting it wholesale? What's the cheapest place? Like I do so much of all of that in the development process. And then once like I've got all that written out and scripted and ready, I will then put together kits, and depending on what the class is, the kits can take anywhere from like a day, like an 8 hour day to 2 8 hour days to put together. And then basically when I show up on the spot, everybody just gets a kit. There's a few things that they share, like markers, sometimes scissors, like little things like pins, little things like that. But for the majority, almost everything that they need is in their class kit. And almost every class they get to take that whole thing home. The exception is like timbre. Like I have a set of stands specifically for class, and then people can buy some after class. But like that's really the only exception I have. Almost every class they can take everything that they got and bring it home with them. And most of my classes either come with a finished thing that they do, so they'll have like cheat sheets and examples, or they will have a project to take home, because I think that the best way to learn is by actually doing the thing. And a lot of people are
Okay.
afraid to go straight into their costume and do it. So it's like, here is a thing. And then when I get home, I also send a follow-up email.
Oh, you're so good.
But like that's a lot of work. So like
Yeah,
that's
it
why my
is. It's a
workshops are
lot, a
priced.
lot of
That's like
work.
why my
Yeah.
workshops are priced the way they are though.
Mhm.
It's like it's days of work.
That
I
makes
some
sense.
I sometimes think of the compensation split specifically, you know, in terms of how much of the ticket proceeds are going to the instructor, us versus the con. I will sometimes vary these numbers depending on how much logistic work the con would like us to take on versus what they would like to control. Because to me, a lot of the work is not just making the workshop, testing the workshop, making the kits, the pre-con stuff. There's also a lot of work in terms of getting the equipment, setting up the space, checking people in. Like there is also a lot of at con things happening. And for some cons, it might be really appealing to be as hands-off as possible. Like, yes, we absolutely still need our helpers. We still need our organizational people. But a lot of the in-classroom things experienced people can handle. And if that's the case, then to me, I would prefer to see a slightly higher split of the ticket revenue, since we are taking so much more of that time on versus the times that we've worked with a sponsor, like actually a sewing machine sponsor specifically, and they've done a lot of the work and they've done a lot of the classroom management. That makes so much more sense that they should see more of that revenue to make up for the amount of work that they've done as well. So sometimes I will give cons options for what my opinion of the split should be based on that.
Or sometimes the cons want to buy the materials
Yep.
and have them on site already, in which case, I mean, there's pros and there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's almost more work to explain to some poor person in logistics, like, no, this is the paper we need. No, interfacing is not the same as stabilizer. But some cons want to do that. You know, they have deals and they want to make all the purchasing through their tax exempt status or whatever and have it on hand for us. And then, you know, that accounts for the compensation as well, because then we're not out the costs, but then you are out the extra logistics of, no, not, you know, I need markers, not colored pencils. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. It's hard to nail it. It depends on what the con wants to do, what we want to do, and also, you know, what the con is. Like, is it a small con full of newbies? Is it a big con with a lot of masters? Like, what kind of classes are we doing? Is there a sponsor involved? Is there sewing machines involved? All of that.
I'd say as a con runner, think about how much do you want to put, how many hats do you want to wear? How much do you want to control the new program? Or versus how much would you rather essentially pay someone to come in and do as much of it as possible for you? And what's right for your con?
Yes. I feel like there's so many little costs that we absorb. I typically ship some of my equipment ahead of time. Like my heat guns, I will ship those ahead because I have purchased them all. I've invested my own money in them and I know that they work. I know that the cables are long enough to reach the outlets. And if anything happens to them, I'll just replace them. It's fine. And not a lot, yeah, like you're saying, not a lot of shows will want to invest hundreds, thousands of dollars into the equipment needed for these workshops. But I do feel like from the instructor side, having that autonomy and that control over my supplies is important to me. And again, I think that this is because I had a traumatic experience with not having the stuff that I needed, or it was wrong, or it wasn't, you know, wasn't working, or there were no plugs, or like the power kept going out, you know, all of that stuff you learn kind of as you go. But even flying on an airplane and having a check bag that has equipment in it, or kits, like I count that as cost. And I count that as when I'm trying to figure out what my kits are going to cost me in time and materials and shipping and getting it there. And also setting up, instructing the thing, cleaning up, and loading everything out. All of that takes time, and it all factors into how I price the minimum amount that I can charge for my workshops. And so sometimes I can't do the workshop that I want to do because it's just going to be too expensive for the show. It's just not the right fit. And I think that's also why an experienced instructor will have basically a menu of things like, oh, these are inexpensive, but it's a fun class that I can do, and it's a little easier for me to travel with, and so we can do that versus the higher level classes that take 2 hours, and they're more expensive, and it takes more logistics and more stuff to make those things happen. To have someone that can have a good eye on all of that and can speak to that, that's where your experienced instructors are really going to help you out to figure out what you can actually do at your show. So we talked a little bit about day of instructor labor and expenses, but something that I think that a lot of shows don't really, because if you've never done this before, workshops take time to set up, and they take time to instruct, and they take time to clean up and then set up again. So when you have that back to back to back workshops, really do need to make sure you're leaving enough time for the instructor to do the thing. And once again, an experienced instructor will tell you how much time they need. It's typically, I don't know about you all, but it's about 30 minutes in between workshops is minimum time to break down and set up.
Yeah, because you're always going to have about 10 minutes of people who are hanging out after the class who want to ask
Mhm.
additional questions. And you're like, that's fine. We can chat. Please put these in a box for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's always
Yep.
what I do. I'm like, I will continue to answer your questions, but you have to go around and collect all the needles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of these classes are messy. Like
Yes.
there's
Mhm.
like the foam classes in particular. Lord help me, I do a resin class now. That takes a full 30 minutes to clean up. That is, yeah, ugh. That's always a stipulation of mine. Minimum 30, and that's not 30 for both the cleanup and the setup. The
30.
really heavy duty classes do need a little more time, but if you ask your instructors, hey, how much time do you need to set up and clean up, they should hopefully be able to give you kind of an accurate read on that.
So let's talk a little bit about the instructor expenses that I think should be covered by the event, that I think should be kind of standard. So if you are thinking about doing a workshop at your event, I don't think that the instructor should be paying for the room or for the power for the room or for their travel and lodging. And I know that some of these shows are smaller than others, and if you can find local instructors that can drive, then great. But yeah, are there any expenses that you feel like really should just be handled by the event and not even don't even get the instructors involved with that? It's not part of the ticketing. Don't take it out of the revenue. Anything come to mind?
I'm gonna back you up with the travel and lodging, and specifically like a bag at least. Like if you're gonna choose Delta, then pay for us to have another bag checked. If you're gonna give us
Mhm.
Southwest, thank you, because you get two checked bags. But like seriously though, like really consider our luggage. I feel like that's the one thing that is like always overlooked, and it's like, how do we fit everything in? Or
Mhm.
offer to pay for us to ship the things there.
Mhm.
That is ideal,
Mhm.
if that is an option.
It may be helpful to think of workshop guests similar to how you as a con runner might typically compensate a guest who is going off of a guarantee rather than an appearance fee.
Mhm.
Because unlike judge cosplay guests who would need an appearance fee, in this case, we do have a means to earn revenue and pay ourselves essentially, while you guys are also making money. So the appearance, the fee part of this will hopefully be covered by the ticket sales, but then everything else that is typically standard with your guests, the travel, the hotel, per diem is always nice. The other typical guesting pieces short of actual payment. I feel like if you want to treat all of your guests, with respect and kind of a similar sort of vein, you would want to also provide these kinds of things.
Mhm.
I also just kind of agree with the facilities costs or needs. I think that should be incurred by the show, right? The instructor shouldn't be having to think about how much the power costs when they're doing their workshop. They shouldn't be thinking about, oh, we need to have bonded security. That should be part of that's already an incurred cost of the convention as well. Anything that kind of would go into being able to physically house people into a workshop space, I think should be incurred by the convention. Um, I think we said power, AV for sure,
Mhm.
clean up like the custodial piece, trash bins, those sorts of things, kind of any of those operational things that you would normally use for programming anyway, should definitely be incurred by the convention.
Well, so let's get into compensation models. There's a few that I want to talk about. And workshops, honestly, they've been around for several years, but they aren't super common yet. So there's still a lot of creative ways that I think that shows are trying to figure out how to incorporate workshops into their shows. But there's a few that I want to talk about. There's a bulk fee buyout model, which is where the show will just pay one lump sum to the workshop host, and then it's sort of like, now go do everything. Here's a room, bring your stuff and teach the thing. Guaranteed fee model, guaranteed fee and revenue share, and revenue share. Some of these are very similar, but there are some big differences. So it's good to kind of talk about what these differences are. So I want to start with bulk fee buyout model. Have any of you experienced this? And I want to be sure that we don't talk specifically about any specific shows, because we do have contracts for these shows, and we want to make sure that we are always honoring them and not that kind of information. We're not going to talk about that. But generally speaking, what is a bulk fee buyout model? What does that look like, and what are the benefits?
I did one that was like this for a show. It was for what my chainmail class that I've done. And I mean, I will say that the benefit was that it enabled the con to present this programming for free to the attendees.
Mhm.
There were issues with that. We had twice as many people show up as I had kits, so it maybe was too beneficial. It worked. I think the issue with it was the chainmail class is pretty relatively affordable. I bought all the flyers, I've bought all the teaching aids. So the only like renewable resource that has to be purchased with each class is the rings themselves, and those are relatively affordable. So I think my fundamental issue with this model is that it caps out very quickly. The con may be saying, may be willing to eat $20 a head for a class of 30. They're not going to be willing to eat $60 a head for a class of 30. And so it really limits the amount of programming that you can offer to classes that are either very affordable to put on, or classes where the instructor is having those costs borne by like a sponsor. So it limits the programming.
Yeah, I think if you want to offer high level, high equipment classes, like anything foam work, wig classes, that sort of like honestly tambour, even like anything with a higher cost for the materials, you're going to price yourself out of $20 a head very quickly, because these classes are typically priced more in the $35 to even $55 range. But
So
in terms of like small cons that are maybe just offering one workshop and they're very small and community focused, I think that's where the free model is most successful.
Yeah. So I know we're talking about the free model being associated with a buyout model, but I also want to just mention that if a convention buys you out for your workshops, they effectively can charge a ticket fee if they want. And I think it's important that in that case, we make sure that we recommend how much the tickets should cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I think that is still our arena, and we need to be able to advise them on that. So there is some revenue potential, but there's also the potential to provide your attendees with more access to more fun things at the show. But I agree, it does come with some downsides. I just also want to mention that sometimes I found that the buyout model involves asking the instructor to provide a materials list that has a dollar number attached to it. And I understand the reasoning behind that, but I don't, in my personal opinion, I'm not sure that that is really something that you need to be asking your instructor, because there's so many, as we have already talked about, there's so many other cost factors that go into our classes. It is not simply how much do the materials cost, and then that is the cost of the workshop. So that is part of why we're having this discussion, is to kind of make sure that all of that is clear. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
I think this one is an attractive one, honestly, for newer shows, maybe. And the only reason I say this is I think all the points that we listed were great. I totally agree. I think this does very easily can get into unfair practices if you're not having really open communications with your instructors. However, if you're a newer show, and I think from an instructor kind of, I don't know, safety piece, if you will, if the show bungles the workshop piece, right, and no one shows up,
Mm.
this does guarantee that you're going to get money regardless and that your time and things are going to be compensated. So I think that's something to think about, right? Is once you're
That's true.
as a workshop instructor, right? Like, okay, what is my what's what's the cost benefit analysis here of one? I do think, especially since workshops have become more popular and there are some kind of better standards of practice and kind of ensuring fairness and hopefully shows are communicating with with folks who are facilitating workshops. But if you're a newer show and maybe don't have the clientele yet, workshop instructors, this could be a potentially attractive option. If you're worried the show's going to bungle the ticketing or whatever, then at least you're going to get some kind of compensation because in your contract, here's your guarantee. So just
Yeah.
one thing to think about. But yeah.
I'm
No,
also
that's
going to
really
mention one
helpful.
more thing because you reminded me of this. If you're going to buy out the workshops, be prepared to offer a down payment for the instructor material or the
Yeah.
equipment costs. It's really important to talk to your instructor about that. And I have done like 50% down, or deposit, so that you are giving your instructors the means to purchase all of the things that they need for the workshop. Is very important. So let's move on to the next model, which is the guaranteed fee, which we kind of talked about a little bit. I know that I've done this a few times, but can we talk about the benefits and the considerations of a guaranteed fee model, and what is that?
Oh, my bad. That's what I was talking about. Sorry. I was like, I saw,
Oh, no, no, no,
right,
no, that's fine.
flat fee
You
reading
can
wizards, but yeah,
continue
like
talking about it.
I think it really just depends on, what you want as an instructor. I think guarantees are great if you're kind of like shaky as an instructor about like, oh, what's going to happen here, the operation standpoint. But it does limit, of course, how much you can generate if you are in charge of your own ticket sales. So I don't know. I think if you're a more kind of conservative minded with your how you're spending your money, this is a good one. But if you're kind of wanting to kind of increase your opportunity there, it may not work out as well. But I think really all of these models could be effective as long as the show is having really clear, open communication with the instructor and people are operating with a good faith intent here, right? To not, screw one another over. And I
Mhm.
know as things are what they are, things are a little bit shaky here with just finances and things. So I think it's just really important to try and build trust and hire people that you trust and hopefully instructors are willing to work with shows that have good reputations as well for some of these things. So I'll end there. But I think guarantees could be really effective for ensuring you get something if things don't go the way that they should for ticket sales.
Yes.
Yeah, I think with a guarantee, because just so that the guarantee is essentially the instructor is guaranteed to walk away with X amount per class. And ideally, the ticket sales have sold well enough that the ticket sales is what is making that X amount. But if not, the con makes it up. That's what we're talking about with a guarantee, right?
Yes.
So I think that can work well. I do think you have to consider your ideal class size when you do that. I think the con probably wants more seats per class with that model, which makes sense. They want
Mhm.
to ideally have the ticket sales make up what the guarantee would be. And I know that like I have a lot of classes where some of my classes I'm like I will take 30 people, and then some of my classes I'm like absolutely not. The instruction degrades after 15, and I will not teach it to more than 15 people because I can't give the people the attention that they need. So that's something to not a good or a bad, but something to keep in mind. I think with that model is like what would be the expected class size, and so then what classes would you want to offer?
Yeah.
Mhm. I was also going to mention that sometimes you want to make sure that when you are asking your instructors to do all of these things even though there's a guarantee, I do feel like it is not unreasonable to ask the instructors to promote the classes because you want to, you're saying, okay, you get, X amount of money for teaching this class, but then they don't post about it or no one posts about it and no one comes to the class. We don't want empty classes either. But I think that it is important to just remember that there should be a good understanding of what the expectations are for promoting the class and getting butts in seats. All right, well, let's move on to revenue share. I feel like that's one that's getting bounced around a lot. I think a lot of shows are trying some things out in this category. But revenue share is basically ticket sales are shared with the instructor. They're split in a certain way with the show versus the instructor. So let's talk a bit about the benefits of that in terms of what the show, what the convention runners or the event, what are the benefits as far as like through the event's eyes are the benefits of a revenue share? Pros and cons? You're my showrunners. I'm
I was gonna say I
sorry.
could spitball, but I'm not the expert here.
Okay, so no, but truly that's the lowest risk for the show, right? You're only going to have to pay the instructor the amount that whatever percentage you decide from the ticket sales, and the rest of that money will come to the house. So it is generally, I think, a lot very attractive for conventions to be like revenue share model. We'll just split the cost. That means that the onus is on both of us to make sure that these work well. If you have like the guarantee model plus the revenue sharing, I mean, the instructor will get something and then they'll get whatever else on top of that minus the expenses the show incurs to either, it depends on what they consider fees. Like maybe they put your housing or your lodging rather and your travel in that, and then you get whatever's left over in a surplus model. Or it could be the cost of the class itself. If the show is buying you materials, sometimes they will take that out of the overall ticket sales, and then you can get the rest of it. So the house will pay itself back, and then you'll get whatever is on top of that. So I think that is an attractive model for shows from an we can get money kind of standpoint. But I do think that from a financial and math standpoint, it is very complicated because you have to really dig into all the finances and make sure that everything is split the way that it is. And I think that can make contracts very complicated. So, and then as an instructor, you don't always know what you're going to end up with at the end of the day. And I'm a person doesn't like risk. So, I think it makes sense it's the most, I guess both parties benefit from that a little bit, but from an instructor standpoint, you don't always know what you're going to get. But from the show, you're like, well, we're going to just take whatever we need out of the overall amount and pay ourselves back.
I tend to like this model personally, just because it's, I often go into a show aiming to sell out all of the seats. That's kind of always our goal. And we tend to do that, depending on the show's involvement. And so, a lot of times when I think of the revenue, I'm kind of thinking of the best case scenario. And a lot of times the best case scenario is the revenue split, because you're always getting the butts and seats, you're getting the full amount of the tickets back. I think the main difficulty with this is exactly what you mentioned, in that it's actually more complicated to figure out the numbers than one might think, because hidden in there, if your instructors are paying for the materials, a good rule of thumb that I like to say is that a lot of times the ticket price is, or the cost of the class in materials is 50% of the ticket price. So you have to remember that in terms of the revenue split between the instructors, who are also paying for the materials and such. And so that split, at first blush may look skewed or may look odd. But you have to remember that there's actually more numbers behind the scene, because that's a split of the gross, not a split of the net.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the labor involved of like being there and teaching and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I personally haven't had a lot of experience with a revenue split other than like a guaranteed fee plus a revenue share, which of all of these scenarios might be one of my favorite ones. Because I know that at least both parties have a vested interest in, making sure. And even if one side doesn't, at least all of my materials are covered. But my time wouldn't be covered, which always kind of bums me out. But yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the percentages, because I love the way that you broke that down, Regan. But I want to flesh this out a little bit more, because there's all sorts of different ways that we can do this. And I know, Casey, you have a lot of experience with this as well. Can you speak to this? What are your opinions on this type of revenue share model?
I think a big part of it comes with who's paying for materials. Like Regan said, if the instructor is paying for materials, the numbers are going to look really skewed, meaning the convention is going to make a very little amount and the instructor is going to make a rather large amount of that percentage. If the convention is going to pay for the materials, that means that we could probably just do 50-50. Again, not all the time, but like it's, you know, that, and then also like, how much is the convention going to help market? Like we've had conventions that say, oh yeah, we're going to put you here, here, and here, and they don't necessarily. So we really do need in that split to have an agreement too on like how are you marketing this so that you can make money as well. My experiences are typically like 50-50 if our hotel, travel, materials, everything is being paid for is pretty reliable. If I'm expected to bring materials, it's going to be like 15-85 or, you know, maybe 20-80. But I think that is the biggest factor is who's paying for materials, like for me personally.
Yeah, I think this does put the most risk in the lap of the instructors.
It
Because it
does.
is fully on them to fill up the class. The con does not have the same kind of liability that they do when they are giving a bulk or an upfront payment.
Right. I also think this kind of structure works really well when you have a group of instructors that all work together that can help each other. We haven't really touched on this yet, and I don't know if there is space in it, but I have found that at least for when like we work together, we will share each other's workshops often. With ours, and so we're all lifting each other up versus like if it's one instructor or two instructors that might not know each other. I've just that's something I've noticed is that when you, or at least just have a meeting with your instructors, get them all to know each other and on board with that, because I really do think that more tickets sell, the more all of the instructors are sharing all of the classes.
Really good point. Yeah, you'll get more butts and seats if more eyes see the thing and you generate the excitement over it. Well, let's move on real quickly to something that we've already talked about, which I feel like we can kind of understand based on what we've already talked about, which is guaranteed fee plus revenue share model, which is the show says, okay, you get X amount of money for doing this workshop, and then anything on top of that, you get either a percentage or what I love is just the ticket price, because the convention has decided that that's how they want to handle it, which that is my favorite. But I feel like we've already kind of talked about this, but is there anything else that anyone would like to share about this particular model?
I like that one.
No, yeah, I like that one too. I was going to ask you, I'd be like, okay, let's all vote for our favorite one. And I feel like this one is my favorite.
Let me put a little asterisk, which is I like either this one or the full revenue share, depending on the split. Yes. Sometimes it is hard to explain the math.
Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes cons might find a guarantee plus a split just simply easier to budget or to math out.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, sometimes you go through all of the emails back and forth with the show and nothing is really working out, and that's okay. What can a show do if they can't afford workshops, if they can't afford to bring you out? What are some options?
Demos. I always offer a demo of tambour embroidery as like a 45-minute option, because I understand that class is expensive and not all shows can do it. But I really love doing demos and things like that. I think that's a great way for us to at least still share the information. They don't get the hands-on experience, but I think it's a lot more accessible than say like a workshop is, especially for small cons or even new educators. I think that's a good way to get to kind of start seeing like who could be an educator. Do demos, watch them do the thing and talk about how to do the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I really, that's one thing I really like about Cosplay America is she's got panels and then demos and then workshops, and they're all distinctly different things.
Yeah.
Doing different levels of hands-on versus demonstration versus let's talk about it. And they have different costs. So it really provides a variety.
Praise Sue. So moving forward, because we still have a little ways to go, and I would love to just kind of talk about this, but these are just conversational things that I think that we are more informational. I want to talk about ticketing. We've already talked about the cost, kind of the cost of like how we would price things out, but how much does a workshop actually cost? Like how do you decide how much a ticket costs for a workshop? Can we talk briefly about that?
Yeah, so I think materials, the expertise, so like how long have you worked on being good at this thing? And then also how long does it take you to develop the workshop or the class? How long does it take you to put together kits if there's kits? How long is the class? I all of that is lumped into ticketing for me.
Yeah. In general, I would say that this is a question more for the instructors than the con
Mhm.
runners, since the instructors, they should be able to understand what their costs are, what the workshop should cost. One thing I do love though, and this, if you are running more of a local, a community sort of oriented convention, um, sometimes if you've run ticketed programming of some kind in the past, I like to ask, is there a um, is there a price range that you find your attendees are more receptive to?
Mhm.
Because with certain types of cons, with like a certain average age, maybe a certain different culture of what people are willing to pay for or not, um, the more high ticket price classes may not sell well at those cons, even though they might sell well otherwise. And so based on that answer, sometimes we will choose to bring in certain types of programming that maybe it's not quite as advanced, maybe it's not as flashy, but it's more in the range of what people would be excited to pay for, or it's maybe people want more beginner oriented programming. Maybe people are
Mhm.
hungry for something else. And this actually might be something that your cosplay department can help with as well.
Mhm. Mhm. So let's briefly talk about, and I do like talking about this, the ticketing platform and the logistics of that, because it does matter. I have been involved with workshops that had great ticketing platforms that were very clear for attendees to sign up. Um, and when I don't hear from the attendees complaining about how they couldn't find the class or they weren't able to sign up or all the spots were gone and they didn't know about it ahead of time, and they missed out and they're really angry about it, all of that kind of feedback comes back on the instructors a lot of the time. When I don't hear anything about that, it's great. And I know that the show has done a great job making the workshops accessible, and that the information is easy to find on their website or their app or whatever it is that they're using. Um, Casey, I'm going to start with you because I know that you have done a lot of different
I
things.
Yeah, so I use Ticket Leap. Um, that's what I don't know, I just have always used Ticket Leap, but I am curious about how I can integrate ticket sales into my website. So that is actually something I'm thinking about because I would rather it all go straight into my website, have it all on that page, everything all the time if I'm controlling it. I just think it looks better. That's it.
Mhm.
More control over the design and how it looks and all that jazz. That's all. But I like Ticket Leap. It's good because you can do follow-up emails at the end.
Mhm.
There's like just a lot of user-friendly things, I feel like, although they recently revamped it and I had trouble setting up classes because I didn't know how to use it. That's a
I
me
also
problem.
use I also use Ticket Leap. So when we are in control of the ticketing, I liked using Ticket Leap because it does have a lot of those perks. And I like to send a reminder emails out to the people that have registered in advance for the class, which is really nice. Like, you're going to want to go to this place, or please make sure that you show up 5 minutes early, and don't be late. And this is what you do if you can't make it.
one of the biggest factors in terms of ticket sales, especially if you're doing the split revenue where you're on the hook for it, one of the biggest factors I think all of us have seen is, are the workshops advertised by the con on the website, on social media, several weeks ahead of time? I cannot emphasize how important it is for people to know that these exist if you want to get butts in seats. So just make sure that that is in your brain, that you are coordinating with the social media team, because that truly is so crucially important, especially if this is a brand new program and people don't know it exists.
Which is, we're still talking about ticketing, so I wanted to talk really briefly about free workshops. But can we just spend a minute talking about the benefits of that, but also the considerations for free workshops? I know we already touched on this a little bit, but I want to kind of round that out. So what's great about benefits, about free workshops?
Accessibility. Like, obviously, I mean, it opens it up to more people, right? Like, that's fundamentally, I think, the best thing about it is that more people can come. More people have the ability to make time to come.
Yeah. We've also talked about the limitations of having a free workshop and what that means. You have people showing up that aren't necessarily invested in being there. They might leave early, or they might see a chair that's open and they want to come and sit down and take a load off for a little while, which has happened. Meanwhile, someone's really, dying to take the class and can't get in because it's not available. So it's benefits and challenges of having free workshops. So next, we'll talk a little bit about scheduling, which is all part of the programming. It's really, really important to create an efficient workshop schedule because you get a smooth event when you schedule things well. I think that allowing the instructor some control over the timing of their workshops is pretty important. You can work with them on that because they can foresee logistical problems in advance. So let's talk a little bit about that. So in talking about instructor input, how important is it to allow the instructors to look ahead at the schedule and have some input of where their classes are going to fit? What kinds of things are they thinking about when they're looking at the schedule?
I don't know if this is exactly this, but I find it helpful, especially if there's going to be multiple people bringing workshops, to have people work together on the schedule, because you don't want to have like 6 foam workshops and no sewing. We start to cannibalize each other's classes, and also it's better to have a variety. So that's not scheduling necessarily, but it is like planning out the schedule and what the overall workshop schedule is going to look like if there's multiple instructors.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, actually. And if you do have multiple instructors, why not have a big long chat about what everyone is doing so that you can provide some variety and make adjustments so you're not both making pauldrons or whatever. I think that I was talking to one of the twins about this, like scheduling wise, and making sure that you're not putting like a big giant, like a foam building class in the middle of a cosplay contest, like being able to foresee that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's really, like, to your point, like, it's good to collaborate with your instructors when you have them there about, okay, what do you need? And we can figure out where we can put you. But you also don't want to cannibalize like your other main stage events. Like, yeah, the majority of the cosplayers or the crafters are probably going to be at the cosplay contest, if not in it. And you might consider too,
Yeah.
like, well, I know that this particular chunk of time is where the masters are being judged. So probably won't host my master level panels during masters judging, those kinds of things. But I'll also point out too, sometimes you're playing a little bit of contract Tetris. So you might not be able to tell another instructor that another instructor is coming until that contract is signed. So it's like, it's kind of a mess, but I would say sometimes, depending on how the contracts go out, and who's in charge of executing those contracts. So I do think if you're the organizer, you should be aware of all of those different things and be able to put together a preliminary schedule you know that you have access to A, B, and C room for A, B, and C hours. And it's a really collaborative conversation with the instructors of being like, all right, here's what we've got. I'm intending to have these other things that are happening at the same time. Will this work for you? And the instructor can say, well, yeah, that works for me. I need to have access to A, B, and C. Maybe don't run, the workshop with the heat guns at the same time you're running the workshop with the blow dryers, and that can help. Those kinds of conversations are really important
Yeah,
to have. So
yeah.
you're not
Good
both
point.
right, like siphoning the power. And I think right, the organizer probably should lead those conversations because you know what's happening on site. You can see the back end and not necessarily the instructor won't know all the other details, and nor should they have to worry about it. I kind of think that like you don't have to tell them everything that's going on behind the curtain because the instructor will just panic about that. And it's
Yeah.
your job to present it in a way that will reduce the panic. And then also, right, from the instructor's piece, you have to inform the organizer, especially if they don't know anything about crafting of what your needs are. So just be prepared to have like those kinds of.
We did kind of talk a little bit about timing, but performance wise and getting seats, butts and seats. I have noticed that the first workshop slot on the first day of the workshop or of the convention, and also the last one are usually the least attended workshops. So that is always something to consider if you have, like, you can be strategic about that and offer a very popular workshop during one of those times to try to get attendees to come a little bit earlier if they have secured, their ticket or yeah, just something to consider. Also, going back to if you are asking your instructors to also judge the cosplay contest, maybe think about the next morning, not putting them in a workshop the first thing, because they are definitely not going to be fresh. And I can attest to that.
Yeah,
Um,
or even just back-to-back workshops, like talk to them
yeah.
about it first because some of
Mhm.
them, some people will do like 4 hours of teaching straight, and some people are like, no, I need a break. So,
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff too.
Um, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about is the actual workshop rooms. So we can just talk briefly about this because the logistics of the workshop room and the facilities that are provided are really, really important. So let's talk about sewing because I know that a lot of people are interested in having sewing classes at their workshop at their events. What does a typical workshop room look like for a sewing setup?
For
Let's
like full
assume that,
machine sewing.
yeah, let's talk about that first and then
So you'd have
something else.
classroom setup tables, 2 to 3 machines on each table, depending on how long the tables were. So you need cords or like power blocks for those to all plug into. The machines don't draw a ton of power, so you wouldn't need
Okay.
you need outlets, but you can do it with some creative like extension cording.
Mhm.
Um, and then a little bit of space between each machine for people to like work, cut fabric, have their scissors. You would need a couple ironing boards in the back and
Yeah.
irons. That's
Okay.
something that a lot of people don't think about, but like is usually, I mean, Casey, chime in, but like
Yeah,
I want irons.
I typically want irons as well.
Yeah. Um,
Those take power, don't they?
those take power.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of power,
You
yeah.
can run them off of a standard circuit though.
Mhm.
We've had like 2 or 3 running in a room along with the machines, and
Yeah.
it's not caused problems yet. Fingers
Do
Right.
you
crossed.
ever have
If
to? Oh, sorry, you cut out. What'd you say?
if we have only 2 or 3.
Oh, okay, okay.
One of those things where I'm like, I don't want to test that. Like, if two
Yeah.
or three is great. We know those work.
Yeah. I've never had an issue where
Mm-mm.
2 or 3 wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody doesn't need their own.
No, they do not.
Ah, okay. That's a good, but everyone needs their own sewing machine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, how about wig classes, which is a very popular type of a class? Yes, I know we've got some experts in here that have had some experiences.
Um,
Wig styling where there are
wigs are tough.
tools. Yeah.
I don't for pros and cons. I don't know if y'all would ever do this without a sponsor to bring in the equipment, but I have not attempted this myself personally.
It would cost a lot more, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's wigs are tough because it requires a very significant amount of equipment. I've thought about it, haven't done it yet. And it also requires something that Beverly is way more familiar with, which is a lot of power to the room. Just because hair dryers, flat irons, that kind of stuff, that'll draw the most power. Like, you do need the tables, you need the setup so that you can clamp the wigs. But I think the biggest consideration for wigs and also for certain foam classes is the power. That's the beast.
Yep. Yeah, for I have 300-watt heat guns, which is actually on the very, very low end of things. And it actually, like, it's great. It's safer because it's not as hot. But and I can put, I think, 20 in a room. I have a whole formula that I just give to the show to say this is the amount of power that I need at each table, and these are the number of people I need at each table. So I need this number of outlets at each table. So being very, very specific about what it is that you need, especially like you're saying, if it plugs in, make sure that you are communicating with the show about what kind of power does that thing need when it's plugged in, and how many can you have on at the same time. And that is something that their show facilities are going to will be able to figure out. Um, and like I said, it is a cost to the show to have the power. Not that that's something that we really do. I think just being aware of that is valuable.
Yeah, I think the common denominator for all workshops is we need tables for everybody, we need chairs for everybody. A lot of these classes benefit from an instructor table, maybe a projector screen. It's not projector,
Yes.
I'm old. What do you call it? The not a projector, a TV.
Camera.
Yeah.
Yes.
Up in the corner,
Oh,
a
the webcam?
TV up in the corner. And then depending on your class, you may need extra stuff. And then I think, Beverly, like you said, if you want sewing machines, you do need 2 rooms.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to, just in case anybody's like listening to this and is like, oh, this is way too much, like, I don't want to do this. There are plenty of classes. I need a table. I need everyone to have a table and a chair, and we need lights, and that's it.
Mhm.
You know, there are ways to do it where there's not as much equipment and there's not as much setup, but you have to be really clear with the instructors. Like, this is what we
Mhm.
want. What can you bring where a table and a chair is enough?
Which brings us to, so now that we have a room, what is the typical capacity for a class? And I would love to hear from Scone on this.
Yes, there's studies on this about how many people you can teach at a time before it actually starts impacting the quality of the education. I personally will not have more than 25 people in any of my classes. I don't think that after 25 people, and this is, you know, adults, teenagers, adults, I don't think people get enough individualized attention at 25. I honestly think 20 tends to be ideal, but I do like to give more seats because this once I start, you know, once the classes stop selling out, then I'll make them smaller.
I think
But
your only 25 head class is actually the chainmail one,
Yeah.
which does not require as much instruction for most people.
the thing about the chainmail one is there's always like 3 or 4 people that immediately just get it within like 5 minutes, and then they want me to stop bothering them. So that's a weird, but like all the rest of them, I really feel like 20, 22, 25 max is like best quality. And there's classes that I don't want more than 15. I do a draping panel where we do little mini dress forms, and I'm walking them through draping it. And every step I'm walking around with my dress form, I'm letting them look at it up close. I'm checking their work, and more than 15 people, it would just not be effective.
Mhm.
So I mean, for me, and Regan will attest to this, whenever I'm like thinking about a new panel, I'm like, okay, based on the complexity and based on the structure of the like instruction, what's the max class size? Like, that's the first thing I think about, not materials, not like how much it's going to cost. And there's been classes where I was like, the cost would have to be so small and the costs are so high, it doesn't make sense to do it as a workshop. And I've not done them.
I think it's while tempting to put in as many seats as possible for more revenue, you don't want to accidentally toe over the line from a hands-on personalized instruction class to what's essentially a demo.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think the biggest class I ever did was a 30-person class where people were cutting foam, and I realized about 5 minutes in that that was a mistake. There was just way too many people in that class. I could not make myself available to everybody. I may have been able to do it if I had an in-person, like a helper who was very familiar with the project. But thank you for explaining all of that, Scone, because it's really, really important. It's why our classes cannot have like more than a certain number, whatever we deem is the max number of students. It's really important that we stay within that time. That plus the other reason is that we have planned and budgeted for those kits or the materials, so we need to make sure that we don't go over those sizes. So we kind of also briefly talked about accessibility facilities or accessibility and facilities. Having the ability to have someone in a wheelchair in your class is important. Someone who uses a walking device is important. Someone who can't hear or see very well. Obviously, sometimes you will, and I have run into this where it has been like an advanced class or intermediate class, and the skill of the person holding the tool, like they can't actually hold the tool. I've run into that before. So being very clear about what you're going to be doing in the class and what tools you're using is going to be important so people can make an informed decision on whether or not they're able to take the class. But let's talk a little bit about what happens when people are not in the workshops, but in the early morning hours and also after the workshops are done. The room needs to be locked if there are sewing machines in there. You can't just close the door and leave because it is probably in a big convention building. And so having a plan for how you get into the classroom in the morning and how you get the things locked up and where those materials are, if you're storing your supplies in the room, making sure that all of that is secure. Just going back to the workshop organizer or your contact at the show to make that plan is really, really important. Cool. Well, now this is the last big section that we're going to talk about, which is how do you figure out what workshops resonate, will work at a show? What's that process for you all?
For me, it's always a pitch. So I'll pitch specific workshops. So if I know a show is not even interested in sewing machines, I have a set list of workshops that I can teach where I don't need sewing machines, and I will pitch those. And I will pitch probably all of them and then ask them, which ones do you think fit within your conventions? Like what would work for you guys?
Mhm.
I rarely develop for a specific show. Like I would never have a show be like, can you teach this thing? Because if it's
Mhm.
not something I've already developed or offered, like I may not be interested in teaching it.
I will say sometimes I like to consider the audience of the show. If it's a again, very community focused sort of convention, lots of cosplayers, lots of like people who love crafting and that kind of thing and might be looking for more advanced stuff. What I include in the pitch, like Casey said, might be a little different than something that has a much wider audience, and we want to attract people who maybe they want to get into crafting, but they haven't really done cosplay before. And so we have, I'd say one or two very non-cosplayer friendly classes that are usually the first ones I will pitch to that kind of con.
Mhm.
And I like to explain to the showrunner my thoughts behind each of the classes. Between Scone and myself, depending on if there's sewing machines or not, we have we like variety. We like to try and offer a foam class, a wig class, a sewing class, depending on the materials. And so a lot of times I will list out what we can do, depending on if we have sponsorships or not, or someone bringing sewing machines or not. And with a note about any considerations, like any power considerations, any messiness considerations, or why I think this class in particular would be a top choice. And then sometimes I let the organizers pick.
Mhm.
Based on that list and based on and it's also nice because if they already have someone coming in to do needlework,
Mhm.
then they can choose the non-needlework classes rather
Mhm.
than me commanding, hey, let's do more needlework,
How about repeat sessions of some of your popular classes? Do you find that things that fill up quickly, are shows open to having you do more the same class on multiple days?
I'll do
Again, I
that.
think it depends on what's in your roster, maybe. um
Mm.
I think we tend to not do repeats just because we've got a I think if you again don't cannibalize your audience, your ticket sales will always be better. But there are a couple classes that always sell out. Again, if it's those non-cosplayer types classes at the right convention, we like to run multiples of those. The wigs, we like to run multiples of those, especially
Mhm.
because if you're hauling in all those materials,
Mhm.
let's get the seats worth out of it. But short of those two kinds of things, I like to mix it up. I think it sells better.
Yeah. What about you, Casey? I know your tambour classes are so popular. Do you wind up offering them more than once over a convention?
If I'm coming to just teach and they're like, you get 6 slots, like I'll teach timbre twice. If I'm only given like 2 or 3 slots, I want them to be all different classes.
Mhm.
Um, so it's gonna depend, but timbre I'll almost always teach twice if I have like if I'm given the time slots to do it
Mhm.
because yeah, it's just popular. It sells out. I like teaching it too, so
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I do not offer Sewing 101 unless you don't have anyone else to teach it because people
Mhm.
do not want to learn how to sew from me. They want to learn advanced, intermediate, that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. And so like I've picked up on that. So I'm like, unless I'm the only one that can teach how to sew, I should not be teaching it. It's just not like the best placement of my expertise.
I think this
Yeah.
is
That makes
also,
sense.
again, consider the con and consider your
Yeah.
audience because frankly, at a lot, if your audience is very cosplay heavy, a lot of them don't actually want Sewing 101 for a hands-on workshop anyway. They want more and this is kind of getting back to the programming fatigue, why workshops are interesting and unique and cool because I don't know if y'all have noticed, but over the past many years, there has been sort of a stagnation where a lot of panels are the same 101s, the same simple intros, et
Hmm.
cetera, et cetera. And so attendees have already gotten that. And a
Hmm.
lot of them want more unique topics, slightly more advanced topics, maybe intros, but for interesting materials that they've never gotten the chance to touch before.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so we actually don't give any Sewing 101 types of things at all in the roster. I know Scone could, but we just choose to have other classes.
Yeah. I never offer it. I wait until see like what the convention is like, hey, we need this. And then I'll be like, okay, I'll do it. Does that make sense? Like it's not on my like offerings. I just filled the spot if it's needed.
I really love that because I think it just, again, brings it back to intentionality. Like, if you're bringing in this talent, you want to allow them the freedom and creativity to do what suits their best need and what they're going to be most excited and interested in doing. And then knowing what your community is, right? Like, if you have a lot of folks who are maybe afraid of sewing machines, maybe your first workshop isn't afraid, like sewing heavy because you want to kind of build the appetite, but maybe then you offer one sewing class, right? So that you're like, okay, we recognize this as an important skill set for our community, but we know that they're going to be terrified of this and cry, right? So I think, as a showrunner, when you're hiring talent, it's just so important to be intentional about it and really listen to the instructor and not just hire them because, oh, you know how to sew. Here you go, enjoy. You know what I mean? We really want to have those collaborative conversations. I think it makes it a much more positive experience for everybody all the way around.
And I do
Yes.
also want to reiterate that if you are an organizer and maybe this sounds like this is out of your depth, you're not super versed in this community and all of the nuance of what we've been talking about, if you have a cosplay department, the head of your cosplay department and the folks who are in the weeds of that all the time and possibly do a lot of this themselves, that is a great resource to tap and to ask their opinion.
All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about is a typical day of, or day before, day of, day after kind of experience for how workshops run. So I just wanted to run through like, okay, we fly in, we arrive, we go and we find all of our stuff in a pile of other stuff. I know that we have two people here who frequently are behind the scenes on receiving materials. So can you talk a little bit about what actually happens the day before a workshop or in the days before? So we've everything is planned, the machine is rolling, the train has left the station. This is happening. Talk to us about the day before. What happens?
I'll preface with this. I think one, anytime you're doing any kind of large scale operation with human beings, and there is no such thing as a dress rehearsal for these kinds of things, you're going to plan and then things are going to go awry. So this is truly speaking to the best case scenario. I'll say that. Okay. So best case scenario is that you communicate with your team in advance of where things are going to be and when they're going to get there. And then you've also arranged to have your instructors arrive, preferably sometime several hours after the materials arrive so that you can sort them and your instructors aren't hunting for boxes to find things, right? Because at the end of the day, right, they're guests to your event. So you also want to help instill confidence that you are not going to set them up for failure, right? So, that's great. I think that's why it's so important to have an organizer who can get there one, if not multiple days in advance to sort through everything and make sure nothing's missing so that you can troubleshoot and know what the problems are before we start, right? Because as soon as the instructors arrive, I mean, that's kind of go time, right? That means there's some limited time. Ideally, also before that, you've checked in with your facilities team to make sure that there's someone on call to lock and unlock the doors, make sure all the stuff is where they need to be, make sure all the chairs are, who you're going to call in the event of an emergency. Like all that stuff should take place, frankly, months in advance of showtime. But and I think just organizing things in a way that's helpful. And then I think it's also really important to meet with your instructors collectively, if you haven't done so beforehand, just so that everyone's on the same page, right? If you can, introduce them to the staff who are going to be in the room with them to help facilitate so that they can give any additional special instructions, have them get to know each other, right? There's going to be downtime for instructors to chat. So it's nice if they can kind of know who each other are beforehand. And really, I mean, I love it. If you can kind of dress rehearsal this as much as you can, that'd be even better, right? With your team of just like, hey, these are the rooms that we're going to be in. This is what the time's going to look like. This is what the shifts are going to look like. Not all of that is frankly ever possible. But again, I want to speak from an ideal scenario. This would be really wonderful. Um, and then I think just kind of explaining the plan to the instructors is important. I like to create a meeting agenda and to be like, look, here's where all the trash cans are. Here's the closest bathroom. Here's where, you're going to go if you run out of, if all the pencils break, here are where all the other ones are. Um, you know, things like that. Just to plan it out as best as you can. I'll stop there.
I totally agree. We're operating on like best case scenario. And then just plan that it's not going to end up that way, right? Like, so have plenty of runway to like supplies are going to be missing. Somebody's going to break something. Somebody's going to forget something. Somebody will have misprinted something. The doors might not be open. Like, there's so many things that just go on that you have to troubleshoot for. So having as much runway as you can to prep for all that, the better. If you can get there like a day in advance, that would be amazing. Before the instructors even get there or even think about you. Counting all your supplies, reviewing the schedule over and over and over again, reviewing the supply list, having extras of stuff, having somebody in charge of the convention that has the purse strings that can pay for things if something gets broken or needs to be replaced is also very good. And having that mechanism work. All those things are really, really, good. So that's the day to like not panic, and get everything kind of organized and laid out and do a true, this is how we want the flow to go. We want the instructor to stop here, go to this table, this is their stuff, here's their box or whatever organizing that they want to do. We'll clean up during this time. While we're cleaning up, we need to make sure we reorganize it so we can reset up for the next panel. Like, if this panel is using all the Sharpies, we want to make sure we get them together and count them all so that way we can put them in, to the next panel when they need them. And try and get as organized as possible from the beginning, so that way you're not running around like a chicken with its head cut off once day one starts. There'll still be that, but planning best is planning ahead of time, like Tamara said, will help prevent as much of it as you can.
Well said. And then the instructors come in and they're like, "Where's all my stuff?"
Mm.
And hopefully you know
You're
at
like,
that
I
point.
would love to know that too. That's a great
Yeah.
question. You should know.
I do like arriving the night before just to get all my stuff there and organized, because I have kits and I don't want to be dragging those things in through security the next day. Hell no. So, yeah, any tips for starting on time, you guys?
Prayer, crying.
Yeah.
Truly,
I
they'll
would,
get there early and be
yeah.
organized. You know what I mean? Like, you have to, like, from the instructor standpoint too, like, I think it's really important to be early so that way you can find out where all your stuff is. And that way you're prepped to go once you start. You don't want to be scrambling around, because then it throws you off and then you can't teach. So I think being there as early as possible and just getting everything ticked off before you like go play or like hang out is like
Mhm.
the only true way to like ensure, or at least get close to ensuring a successful time.
I normally don't have this problem, but we actually had an issue at one of our shows where people kept showing up either right at the bell or after the bell, and it's very difficult to start on time when that happens. So I am now kind of the opinion that anyone who purchases a workshop ticket needs to be informed that they have to be there 15 to 10 minutes early, 15 to 5 minutes early, and there is a cutoff at the time of start. Because it is unfortunately quite disruptive when they come in late, and then we essentially have to restart the class again to get everyone caught up. So that is important to me for starting on time, I think.
And then finishing on time is really, really important. It's important for the next class. You got to get out of that room. Do you all have any tips for closing up a class that is having trouble closing up?
Send in the staff. I think that's also helpful.
Yeah.
I do this all the time with show running, because I think as an instructor, you're in charge of the room, but I think it's also difficult because you're still a guest. And so sometimes like being the mean bad guy is a little tough. So I don't think it's bad to necessarily rely on the staff to be like, hey, you know that this is supposed to be over. Like, well, you can
Yeah.
encourage people gently to get out of the room. I think it's totally okay as an instructor to make those calls. It's a little different in, contest worlds where the staff truly should be the heavy in most situations. But I think, yeah, you can rely on them too to be like, okay, I'm having trouble. Like this person's really focused, or they're being a little snippy with me when I'm trying to get them out. Rely on them, and hopefully they can help funnel people out and get you on time.
I just had an idea. What if, because Beverly, when you were talking about a timekeeper, it reminded me of I judged with someone one time who he came to the judging room with his own, essentially like a kitchen timer, and he
Oh,
put it
yeah.
on the table. And it was great because in judging everyone gets 5 minutes, it needs to be exact, and so it was great for keeping time. That would also work for workshops too. And then it helps the instructor keep track of things, and then also it beeps really loudly, and then people might get out.
All right. I like that. I just wrote that down. Can you see? Timer. Thank you for
I
that
want to
tip.
buy this and I'll try it and
That
I'll
was
let you know
great.
how it goes.
Thank you. No, that would solve my problem. So clean up, set up for the next class, and then at the end of the day, you lock your doors. And at the end of the event, or if you're done with teaching workshops, you've got to like take all of the rest of the stuff that you didn't use for your class. If you were taking it home, bring that home. Sometimes I will ask the event to ship something home for me if I shipped it there. Equipment or extra kits. Sometimes I'll try to stuff everything into a box, but I will always try to bring a self-addressed label so that everything is clearly labeled. And if anyone has done a workshop with me, they know how insane I am about labeling my boxes so that they don't get lost if they're stacked on top of other things. And I haven't had a problem with things not showing up or getting lost yet. So fingers crossed that that still
It's an
works. But
actual thing of beauty. Like I don't think I think you're underselling The Beverly level of detail and organization is like you think you're organized and then you talk to Beverly for like 10 minutes and you're like, "Oh my God, what have I been doing? I live in a trash pile." Like the labeling, the
The
box one
colors.
of whatever, the color coding.
You
Beverly, can
should
you
teach
make
a
your
workshop.
background the picture that you took of all of the kits?
Oh,
Oh my
right. Like,
gosh.
oh my gosh. It was
Yes.
It
it
makes me
was a
happy.
thing of beauty. It was a thing of beauty.
You should teach
It
a
makes me so
workshop on
You
happy.
could,
packing for workshops
right.
because it is
God,
Hey, we'll talk about
I'd
that
go.
next.
I know I'd go too.
Well, I think is there anything else about at the end of a show, especially from our showrunner speakers here, anything vital that needs to be said that a convention would need to keep in mind for wrapping up a workshop? Event is over, everyone left.
I think I guess I'll say this, and I think it's one of those things too, is like, there's a lot of don't do this or do this and think about this and do that. And I think the end of the day, though, most of your experienced instructors are wanting to make a good experience for both the show and the students, right? And so it's not this adversarial relationships, which I think can sometimes happen in contracting with other types of guests, right? It's truly a collaborative thing, and everyone wants the thing to be successful. So I think it's good to lean into your instructors and really trust them to be the experts in situations. And I think you as a showrunner too, like it is again live operations with no dress rehearsal. So stuff's just going to happen. And I think as long as we're all kind of understanding and kind of giving folks the benefit of the doubt, or I guess, assuming goodwill, if you will, and kind of going forward with that attitude for putting together something large scale. This is just good advice for life. I think it's going to make a more positive experience for all. There's a lot of little stuff to kind of think through in operations and logistics, but if you're hiring talented instructors, they're going to know and they're going to be able to help you figure out stuff. And the same way, you should treat them as guests, as people who know what they're doing so that they can help you figure out some of the holes. So that's the thing I think, just from the operations standpoint, is like the instructors are your friends. We can all do this together. We just have to do a lot of planning, and it should be good. So that's
That
mine.
is such a great thing to kind of wrap this whole conversation up with, is that it is a collaborative thing. I love being an instructor, and I love that shows trust in me to bring this different kind of programming to their show. And I always feel like it's such an honor, and I have the best time with my students. I get energized. I'm always exhausted at the end of these, but I always leave wanting to do it again. And I think that that is a testament to everything running well. But really, those attendees, if they have a good time, that is really what I'm there for, and it's what I love the most. So before we sign off, I would love to hear from everybody. Maybe like one thing that they love about during workshops, or that they have like a little piece of advice or something that they like, a final thought. Um, and then also what, like, where to find you, and maybe what you're doing next if you have something that is coming up soon. Let's start with Casey.
I guess my final piece of advice is just have fun, honestly. Like if your students are having fun and you're having fun, at the end of the day, that's all that's gonna matter, is like everyone is enjoying it. Yeah, have fun. And also like if you get stressed, just smile.
Yes.
It'll help, I promise. Just smile. Yeah, so I'm Casey Renee Cosplay. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and my website. And my next show is Planet Comic Con in Kansas City. I'm so excited. Yes. Yeah,
And you're doing workshops there, right?
I am. I'm teaching
Yeah.
workshops. Yeah, I'm teaching 4 workshops. And my new hoop skirt workshop will be debuted there. And I'm so excited, y'all. Oh, sorry.
I'm
Everyone gets to
excited
make
for you.
really tiny hoop skirts. So
I can't wait. I want to see a parade of them in some capacity. Just like
we
little,
will.
I'm gonna come by and just to see it. I love it.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Let's go next with Scone.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'll let Regan do all the social media stuff, but like, I workshops are just, it's such a unique opportunity. I've seen so much like people making friends, people, finally getting the skill, like they're just so pleased with themselves. I've had people say, "Oh, I'm going to go home, I'm going to go buy these supplies. This is like unlocked something in me." And I like that's honestly what I find super rewarding about doing it. Um, and even classes that like God, sometimes they don't go well. You just my goal is always to have everybody needs to learn something. And as long as everybody has learned something they did not know walking in, it's successful. So I more cons should do them. More cons should do them. They're great.
Regan.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're next.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll give all the social medias and what we're doing next. We are Calvin Crunchy's Cosplay on everywhere, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Our next thing is Anime Milwaukee in 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
We are actually doing one workshop between the two of us because Scone is judging. But since I am not judging, I get to do a workshop. Just because I love workshops and I asked to do it. So we'll be doing foam smithing there for organics. And I think my favorite piece about workshops is because I'm old school, and my favorite part of cosplay will always and forever be the community side of things. And the reason we go to cons is to talk to people and hang out with people and meet other cosplayers. And that's just one of our favorite parts. And the great thing about the hands-on workshops is you get to spend some one-on-one time with some of these folks, and you get to kind of encourage them and maybe help them with a problem that they've been having that they're not quite understanding. And I think it's just really rewarding when it's obvious that someone has really enjoyed the time together in this kind of closed classroom setting. So that's kind of always my favorite thing, when people are really happy about the format and what they got out of it, and also just getting to talk with other people.
That's awesome. I've taken workshops with you and I had the best time. So I hope I get to do that again sometime soon.
Maybe if you taught the Rotary class and then I could go to it and then we can have a class together.
Oh my God, we can combine forces. We'll find someone that teaches the Rotary cutter and then the Rotary
and then
tool,
I'll
the
attend
Dremel.
it and learn.
Yes.
Because I don't know anything.
All right, next Crow.
Let's see. I think I left on my like moment of inspiration, but I'll also add, I think one thing I really love about workshops is it gives people an opportunity to experiment with something that they may otherwise be afraid to do in their own house, to break or to, spend money on and not go well. My favorite part of workshops is when people are like, I'm going to try a new thing, or like, okay, I'm going to show you how to break this so that you know what you look for when you've done it wrong. And people get so excited about that element of work. And so it's just so cool to get to see people kind of work with materials fearlessly, and to be able to be part of that journey of them developing confidence is really, really inspiring to me. So I love that.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah, it's a good time. It's good times. I think in terms of appearances, so the one hat we have is obviously operations. So our first one is going to be next month, which feels like it's tomorrow, but it's fine. We have NakaCon, which is where we're launching our first series of workshops there with some instructors coming in. So we're super excited about that. And then right after that, literally the following weekend is Planet. We don't do workshops there, but we do the cosplay contest and stuff there. So super excited. Our community is awesome, and I love the Midwest. 10 out of 10. And then in terms of our own personal appearances that we're going to do as pros and cons, I think our next upcoming one is Anime St. Louis in April. Maybe there's a library con in there somewhere too. I got it. The count dates mean nothing to me at this point. But anyway, we're super excited. I'm just super excited for 2025's like appearances and opportunities because it's just good times to see good people. So
Awesome, Tiffany.
You stole mine. I was gonna say I
Next.
love the unhinged like you'll just see like somebody that comes in terrified, especially for like wig styling, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. I'm scared of this thing. And you're like, look, let me teach you how to not be afraid of some acrylic strands, and we'll just go through this together. It's okay if you make a mess. This wig is your trash wig to just cut up on. And the students are just hilarious. They just say the funniest things, and kind of, I think, help me be a better person to understand concepts in a different way. So I'll just say, I guess, from the instructor piece, what I take from it is I get to think of new, exciting mnemonic devices for how to teach certain things. And I get to be a little bit more creative with like how instruction works. And that is one of my favorite parts of cosplay in general, is like how to be creative and how to do different things and how to reach people in different ways. What kind of references can I use? What kind of like learning devices can I use? Like I recently, I do a workshop on ventilating, and I like the latchik style one because I'm a ham-fisted person, and the little tiny baby needle doesn't work with these mitts. So I use that. I use the latchik style, and I explained it by giving everyone a little square of those little latch hook rugs you used to make like back in the day, like the little like rugs. So we practice with that before we start with the real thing, with Swiss lace. So it's really fun to like come up with different ways of like getting instruction out there to like reach people in new ways, to demystify and make cosplay and crafting less scary. So that's my favorite part. Um, Same as Tamara, I'll be at the same shows. Haha, NakaCon is coming up in a couple weeks, crying and screaming. And then, but it's a great show. It's a lot of fun. The attendees are wonderful. And then right after that, we'll be seeing Beverly and Casey at Planet Comic-Con Kansas City the weekend after. So if you see us and we can't form words, it's because we ran a show, 4 days prior to that. But exciting stuff. And you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok for however long that lasts, Blue Sky, and I think that's it. At Pros and Cons Cosplay.
Awesome. Well, and I'm Beverly, also down in Creator Studios, which is where you can find me on all the socials. Just type in Downin, or not Dowmin, or Dowin. Um, and I kind of already talked about my favorite part of this, but I like this panel. Being able to talk about this is one of the things that I love about cosplay in general. But I love that education is something that a lot more people are taking more seriously, and that people are interested in making things more accessible, and they're really putting their whole being into it. And I think that's where a lot of the value of adding workshops to program and tracks can benefit. Like, there's a whole bunch of people that love this so much. So I hope that if you have made it this far in this panel, if somehow we have not answered questions, please reach out to any of us. I'm sure that we would be happy to help answer or field a question. And I am going to be at Planet next month. They haven't announced me yet. This is a very new thing, but I'm very excited because I'm very excited to go. But I'll also be at Emerald City Comic Con, doing workshops there, so you can find me. Although those are free workshops, and the registration happened, and then it like came and went. I didn't even know, and they're all signed up for. So we'll see how that goes. It's gonna be fun no matter what. Looking forward to it. But thank you, everyone, for being here and for being so awesome. I know this was a long conversation, but it was a good one. I think it was really important. And thank you again for being here. I hope you all have an awesome convention season, and I look forward to seeing you at whatever show we run into each other next. Bye, everybody.